Baader-Meinhof group was one of many student and non-student groups of more or less anarchist, more or less Marxist principles that went through the sort of cycle of radicalization in an extremely accelerated pace. And in very short order, this particular group, with Ulrike Meinhof representing the public face of the peace movement, turning to the harder and harder left, this group went from basically civil disobedience to jailbreaks, to bank robberies, to bombings, and worse. And so the collapse, if you will, of a sort of an activist left that had a variety of options into a few rather extreme factions with a lot of disaffected sympathizers facing off against a government which became more and more rigid in its response, created a circumstance in Germany that was very explosive. Richter, as a person who had been through the Nazi era, who had lived in East Germany, who had few illusions about any political ideologies and an sort of antipathy to all ideologies, viewed the Baader-Meinhof group with great skepticism, but he was more or less of an age with Ulrike Meinhof, and I think sympathized with her disquiet, her desire to do something different, to make a different world. And although not an activist himself, that resonated with him to a certain extent. And then the tragedy of her gradual decline into extremist violence politics became something he thought about very hard. As I said, there are many stories told in these paintings, and they're told incompletely. There are also some background stories, and I'm already into one of them, because around Richter at this time, when he was teaching in the Academy in Düsseldorf, were numbers of people who were very sympathetic to the Red Army faction, not least of them being Isa Gensken, who became his wife, who was at that time a friend of Benjamin Bucklow, who was very much on the left at that time in Germany. And so Gerhard was in active dialogue with people who were openly sympathetic, or if not openly, at least basically sympathetic to what the Baader-Meinhof did and became. When he began these paintings, as I said, it was 10 years after the events, and I think it was an attempt to come to terms with his own ambivalence, and an attempt to sort of delve into the things that one could not know, issues that could never be settled as matters of fact, much less as matters of opinion or emotion response. And in these paintings, although they're all modeled on news photography and forensic photography and so on, and they shun all kinds of standard political rhetoric, there's an enormous amount of pathos. And it's the pathos of these paintings in tension with their coolness, their seeming matter-of-factness and so on, that makes them so remarkable. Ulrike Meinhof was in the corner, and Gudrun Ensslin were both engaged in a variety of peace activities. Particularly, Ulrike Meinhof was really a national figure. And she was involved in student politics, she was involved in television, she was involved in ban the bomb campaigns and so on. And she was one of the best-known spokespersons of that time for peace causes. And again, it was the voice of a generation that had grown up with Hitler or in the aftermath of Hitler, and who had come from families that had been resistant. So on this side, you have a posed photograph taken on commission of Ulrike Meinhof when she was in her public best, although she looks like a high school yearbook photograph. That's not what it is. It's a young celebrity's photograph. Next to it are 3 images of Gudrun Ensslin after her arrest. And these are taken from full-figure news photographs that were heavily retouched by the photographers, and yet at the same time rather sharply focused. And what Richter's done is to soften the focus, to eliminate all the extraneous detail, both the background that you could see and the retouched areas, and to turn it into a much more unified image of a woman who, if you will, comes into the glance of the camera, responds to it in a way that seems somehow to be warm and open, and then withdraws into herself and turns away. So it becomes a narrative of her last sort of contacts with the world before she disappears into first total imprisonment and second into her death. So those photographs on that side are of two distinct categories of photography. The ones on this side are totally forensic and were taken by the German FBI after the death of Baader in his prison cell. I was doing a book on these school paintings when they were first shown in New York in 2000. Not in New York, I should say. They were already been shown once, but when they were first shown to Museum of Modern Art in around 2000, we requested the publication rights of these photographs so as not to create difficulties with whoever owned those rights. And in the case of this photograph here, we found out that the publishing rights rested with the German FBI. And so we wrote to them and said, may we publish these photographs in this form, as they appear in the paintings. And may we publish also the newspaper images as they appear, because we found all old copies. Not only did we get a permission from the German FBI, we got the original photograph for this and for the record player. And through digital enhancing, we were able to read things in these photographs that you cannot read in their originally published version, and certainly not in the paintings where they're further blurred. And they're very telling because you can read a good deal of the spines on this bookshelf, and so you sort of know what kinds of things he was looking at. Goya, he was reading Rosa Luxemburg. None of it unexpected from somebody in his position in the left, but it makes it different when this becomes not the abstraction of a library or the memory of a library, but actually these are the things that were his daily, if you will, sustenance. And in the case of the record player, we found out that it was an Eric Clapton album. It was the second side. So we looked at the lyrics of the songs on the second side of the Eric Clapton album and tried to see what sense we could make of it. And indeed, there is a single song on that, which is essentially a suicide lyric, which does not mean that he did kill himself, as opposed to being killed by the police, which is one version. The other is that he did kill himself, and that the others who died that night also killed themselves. But simply that kind of thought was in his mind, was in his ambience. Behind me are a group of paintings. There are altogether 6 paintings, but there are 3, if you will, subsets. One is a group of 3 paintings of Ulrike Meinhof, after they found her hanging in her cell. 2 of Johannes Baader, after he was found in his cell shot with a handgun. And 1 of Gudrun Ensland, who is the woman who appeared first with sort of 3 pictures of her turning towards and then away from news cameras, hanging from her cell. Now, as I say, the circumstances of their deaths are mysterious in 2 cases. On one night, October 18th, 1977, 3 members of the Baader-Meinhof group died or were killed, and another was severely wounded. Now, in the case of Ulrike Meinhof, there's really no disputing that she hung herself. And there's lots of circumstantial evidence from her behavior in court since they were in the process of a trial, from her correspondence with people, from her conversations with people, and so on. She indeed had reached the breaking point. In the case of Gudrun Ensland, we don't know. In the case of Johannes Baader, we don't know. And it is still contested in Germany as to what really happened. You cannot know what happened. You cannot know what happened on this night. The evidence is, as I said, partial. It's not all available, and motive is almost impossible to discern in many cases. One version of the events is that those who died that night knew that the only weapon they had left against the state was an embarrassing set of inexplicable murders. And therefore that the easiest way to inflict damage on the government was to kill themselves and to leave that hanging in the balance, if you will, politically. Another version of it is that this was revolutionary despair, and that they came to the end of their rope and they simply, it was that. And the other version beyond that is that the police, or at least some branch of the police, crept into their cells and assassinated them where they were. What's the point of all of that? The point of all of that is that when we look at these pictures, they tell us something, but nothing we can get our hands on. They do not explain these events. They don't even quite portray them. They evoke them. They bring them forward. They bring them forward from memory, so that if one is of a generation where this was news, part of looking at these pictures is remembering what one knew at the time, also being made aware of what is already beginning to be forgotten of the time. As far as a younger audience is concerned, it is to say, this happened, and if you don't know it, why not? And if you do know it, what do you know of it? 3 groups of paintings tell the story before the night of October the 18th. The first one is, again, of Baader-Meinhof as she was before she joined the RAF. The second in the timeline are the 2 paintings on the right of me here, which are called Arrest. And they show the confrontation between Holger Mainz, who was a member of the RAF, and a police tank that trapped him in a garage, and the whole area was swarming with police, and he came out and surrendered for himself and was asked to strip naked so that he couldn't conceal any arms. And so basically you're seeing a man completely, without the ability to do anything, confronting mechanized military power. Now, Mainz was a very interesting person. He was an experimental filmmaker. He had a complex mind. Like most members of the RAF, he was not a unidimensional person. He was not certainly simply some kind of crazy person who went off into the extremes of politics in one fell swoop. He was somebody who evolved and who had a complex reality and embodied that for the people who knew this group and thought about it. Now, in his particular case, he also committed suicide before October the 18th, but he did it in the most excruciating way by embarking on a hunger strike and then absolutely refusing to break that hunger strike until he died of total emaciation. In the case of internment, the backstory is even, if you want to say that, richer and in certain ways more troubling. Once the 3 members of the group had died in prison, the question of what could be done with them, where they could be buried, if any place in public, if any place in any kind of proper fashion, conventional burial fashion, became a matter of heated debate in Germany. And the families wished to bury them in a graveyard and wished to bury them in Stuttgart. Whereas many people in local politics in Stuttgart did not want this to happen at all under any circumstances, did not believe they deserved public burial, did not believe they deserved to be in a consecrated graveyard. I mean, the set of issues you can imagine went on and on and on. And at a certain point, the mayor of the city stepped in and simply said, this will happen. They will be buried in the graveyard, and it will be done properly, and if it becomes a shrine or if it becomes a gathering place for the left, so be it. We cannot deprive people of the right to a proper burial because of their politics, and he said, if I'm not mistaken, that after death all such questions become irrelevant, or something to that effect. Now, who it was is important because the mayor of Stuttgart at that time was Manfred Rommel, who was the son of Erwin Rommel, who was the great Nazi German panzer general, who was involved in the plot to kill Hitler and who was forced to kill himself by Hitler when that plot failed. So you have the direct manifestation, if you will, of an acute sense of history, tragedy, power in play against individuals, entering into a situation where an entirely different set of circumstances seemingly apply, but actually not. It's all a continuous sort of set of circumstances. Now, there are also things that are important in this, that the painting you can see is very blurred. What was going on there was essentially kind of demonstration, lots and lots and lots of people following the coffins into the graveyard, into their burial place. And it's the image is a fairly blurry, as is, black and white image. But in the top center, there is a cross. One of the trees spikes up, and then there's a crossbar. And it's very subtle, but that is not in the original photograph. And there are many such allusions to religion in Richter's statements, and many of such allusions to religion in Richter's paintings, increasingly actually since this time. These paintings are not an attempt to turn the Baader-Meinhof group into religious martyrs, far from it. Richter's own religious or quasi-religious paintings are not declarations of faith, pretty far from it. All of it is about belief, doubt, uncertainty, yearning, all the things that revolve around politics, around religion, around ideologies. And his inability to dismiss these issues, his unwillingness to dismiss them, his unwillingness to take firm positions in order to justify his interest in them, his sense that these are part of the human condition, part of his condition in any case, and that one can paint that. Of all the unpaintable things, the one thing one can paint, perhaps in his case, is over and over and over again to embody the things of which we are uncertain and to give them resonance without giving them right. If you think of what history painting has been historically, it has been painting about public issues commissioned by the state as a means of rallying people to a general idea of society represented by power. That if it hasn't been that exactly, it has been oppositionally sort of the same thing. You make paintings of the good and the true in opposition to oppression and in anticipation of a revolution that will transform all. These paintings do neither, and they, in fact, don't represent anybody. They are the paintings of somebody who is not sure of things of which one cannot be sure. They, in some cases, are really the only surviving record, really, that the public will ever have of these events. And that's one of their ironies. The deaths of the people who died on the 18th of October cannot be settled. And therefore, the meaning of their deaths cannot be settled. And that is essentially the crux of the matter in this painting, among many such cruxes, so to speak. If the purpose of history painting has always been to develop kind of unanimity on the meaning of historical events, then these paintings are not only profoundly subversive in light of what they portray, but profoundly subversive in light of the conventions of history painting. Because what they do is they gather us together to look at something about which we will automatically almost have differing opinions, and about which we cannot speak with any authority based on the evidence, since none of the evidence is stable. And in some cases the evidence has disappeared, in some cases it's inaccessible, in some cases it doesn't tell enough, etc. But here you have the confrontation in the sort of formal semiotic way between the factuality of photography and the representational license of painting. But what Richter uses the representational license for is to question the factuality of photography, its status as evidence in anything. And so at every level these paintings operate to point one's mind towards something and then to let one understand that it will never be graspable. And in this context, Richter's blurs, which are something he does for many reasons, end up also being all the richer, since everything, if you will, seems to be, again, sort of in the process of being both stated and erased, as is history itself, since we know that, I mean, the cliche now is that history is written by the victors. That's sometimes true. More likely, history is written by many people, none of whom have total control or command of the realities, much less the circumstances in which they're writing, and therefore history is written by everybody and nobody, and is never set.